Now let's start with my presentation about a short introduction to religious tourism. According to the statistics, Albania has been the country with the largest increasement in international arrivals in the post-COVID era, achieving a small miracle for a country that did not previously had much popularity and visibility in the tourism sector. The progress and the development of tourist services is remarkable, but a qualitative upgrade is also necessary in terms of the promotion and highlighting of the importance of the country's cultural heritage, which is directly linked to the monuments and holy places of the country's various religious communities. So, the effort of the Religious Tourism Forum and one of its main goals since its founding day is to highlight the importance and characteristics of religious tourism, which can offer unique services and experiences to the country's visitors. After all, one of the observations we made when approaching travel agencies and people in the tourism industry was a lack of clarity as to what the development of the religious tourism industry is and what it is for. So the purpose of this introductory presentation on religious tourism is to highlight all the theoretical questions surrounding the issue of this special type of tourism, to make an introduction to its central characteristics, to define it and to analyze it as thoroughly as possible, its main aspects, attempting a brief comparison with the characteristics of a place of pilgrimage. Many believe that religious journeys to holy places were among the oldest and most common types of travel in human history. These journeys were an integral part of the ancient world, and their history dates back to earliest days of the appearance of religion in the world. Piety and strong belief in one's religion are considered strong motivators. What is remarkable, however, is that the pilgrimage continues to exist and is dynamic. This type of travel, not only because of the growth of world religions, but because of the contrast with other forms of tourism, has become welcomed by the public. Pilgrimage, in the traditional sense, is considered to be an inner journey involving divine powers and complex spiritual phenomena. In general, people have a need to travel both internally and externally. In religious tourism, religious belief on the one hand plays a role, and on the other hand, when tourists visit religious sites, it is a journey through time, almost like a pilgrimage. Another aspect is the fact that tourists have religious motivation before they intend to travel. However, other purposes and reasons, including curiosity and exploration of historical and religious issues, may come in the way. In general, this type of tourism is a special display of cultural tourism, followed by the display of different cultural products. It is noteworthy that an important part of cultural tourism lies in visiting sacred sites. As we have pointed out, religion is one of the factors that motivate people to embark on journeys and participate in major pilgrimages to different parts of the world. As such, religious tourism involves visiting destinations solely or largely motivated by religious purposes, and is one of the oldest types of tourism. It is not so distant part tourism has become a topic of interest of the because of the local and economic development it provides. Religion is a factor of interest as well in tourism without any exception. Modern tourism has become the functional and symbolic equivalent of a growing number of traditional religious activities, such as festivals, and pilgrimages. It could be said that Christmas is undoubtedly the most widely celebrated religious holiday and has become one of the most profitable time of the year for retail stores. Thus, the Christmas season provides an excuse for businesses to use marketing tactics such as sales and discounts to exploit the important traditions of gift giving and hosting Christmas lunches that persuade customers to spend significant amounts of money in stores and on commercial centers. Religious tourism, however, is not easy to be defined. In the tourism literature, it is often categorized in different ways by different authors, with religious tourism, pilgrimage tourism, cultural tourism, heritage tourism, and spiritual tourism often being used interchangeably. Cultural tourism and religious tourism in particular, although they can be defined differently, are always connected to each other, as religion is part of culture. In addition, spiritual tourism can be broadly defined to include tourism, particularly religious tourism that is motivated in whole or in part by values. It is a vehicle of change for the better and can lead to peace if it is guided properly by codes of ethics and behavior that originate by religions and social cultural values that derive from religions. This alternation between pilgrimage, religious and cultural tourism can be seen in this figure that you can see the poles between pilgrimage and cultural tourism, and somehow in the middle we can put religious tourism and also the characterizations below these two poles. More generally, religious tourism as a concept is a form of alternative tourism which is created by the need of the individual either to visit for pilgrimage or to know religious monuments or to enjoy religious experiences. Sfagiannakis points out that religious tourism is the result of the desire of individuals to visit a holy place where they can at the same time get to know other monuments and cultural traditions. Also, an important dimension that should not be overlooked with regard to religious tourism is its multidimensional nature that allows it to connect elements culturally, historically, and spiritually. Religious tourism was defined at the first Congress of Religious Tourism in Ravenna in 1990 as a human projection, a form of solidarity and friendship, a meeting of people, their cultures and religions, learning about peace between people, respect for nature, and exploitation of natural and cultural property. One of the views is that religious tourism focuses on those visitors who belong to a particular religious group and travel mainly with the aim of expanding their knowledge and or engaging in a particular religion. On the other hand, the World Religious Travel Association defines religious tourism as travel to religious destinations, travel to religious gatherings, travel with missionary and or humanitarian intentions, and travel with the intention of companionship, fellowship, and friendship. However, religious tourism can be defined as the journey with the primary motive of experiencing religious forms or the products they evoke, such as art, culture, traditions, and architecture. Two aspects of religious tourism can also be distinguished. First, the faith of a tourist who has a spiritual attachment to the destination according to his/her religious beliefs, and second, the new spiritual experience of a tourist who belongs to another faith or a different religion and for whom destination and religious practices have the dimension of novelty. Religious tourism can be also categorized as pilgrimages, mission trips, scholarship vacations, faith-based cruises, conferences and rallies, monastery visits, and guest accommodations, religion-based camping, and visits to religious tourist attractions. For the variety of this industry, we would like to record the range of projects and possibilities of religious tourism. In this list, we can include traditional pilgrimage, religious tourism, ecclesiastical tourism, religious events, feasts, missionary and volunteer tourism, hermitage, youth activities, cruises having religion as their base, religion roots, vacation, spiritual pilgrimage, secular pilgrimage. Today, there are thousands of different holy places around the world that have enough sites to develop and provide transportation to the population. A holy place has a different importance for every group of people depending on the goal of each tour. Many studies of these religious tourism destinations in particular and on religious or spiritual tourism in general have been and are being done in all parts of the world where religious sites and celebrations are. Many of these studies demonstrated the necessity of public policy formulation as a key determinant for the development of religious tourism. Without proper governance and sustainable management of religious sites, planned development cannot be ensured. In fact, the opposite effects of unplanned explicit policies in religious destinations that encourage not only fundamentalist visitors and discourage mainstream tourist arrivals have been pointed out. The negative impact of religious orthodoxy on tourist arrivals has also recorded. However, studies show a positive relationship between religious diversity and tourist arrivals. The necessity of sustainable policies has been a dominant issue in the development of any form of tourism, mainly because the negative effect of commercialization has been illustrated in some studies, where it has been noted that even hip-hop lyrics are used to promote religious destinations. A characteristic example was in Senegal by a famous Senegal hip-hop artist that has a big career also in the United States. The necessity of sustainable policies has been a dominant issue in the development of any form of tourism, mainly because the negative effect of commercialization has been illustrated in some studies. In particular, the extent of exploitation of traditional religious practices in favor of revenue generation was explored. These studies positively confirm the effectiveness of sustainable policies to ensure the long-term viability and attractiveness of religious tourism destinations. This rationale is useful and beneficial to all stakeholders related and involved in religious tourism, such as governments, religious communities, international organizations, host community, local authorities, and infrastructure managers, internal and external organizations, transit companies, service providers of local tourism, academic environment, several private stakeholders. Let's move on now to see the connection between religious tourism and pilgrimage. The phenomenon of pilgrimage existed many hundreds of years before the phenomenon of tourism appeared in human behavior. In fact, this distinction between pilgrimage and tourism is quite difficult, but the distinction between pilgrimage and religious tourism is even more controversial, as the lines between them are naturally much more blurred. In general, the tourism literature documents the differences between these two forms of travel based on the motivation of travel. Many researchers insist on personal motivations and beliefs to make a strict distinction between pilgrims and religious tourists, justifying this classification mainly on psychological grounds. This demarcation introduces a strong and difficult dichotomy, which always very little maneuver for epistemological approaches. The predominant reason why one goes on a pilgrimage is usually to ask for some favor on God or the deity of the shrine in return for simply making the journey or participating in ancillary worship exercises. We can call pilgrimage as a double journey, internal and external, as opposed to pure tourism, which allows only one external journey. On the other hand, some researchers consider that the separation between tourism and pilgrimage is somehow a brutal and meaningless process, regardless of the motivation, and thus prefer the composite phrase pilgrimage tourism, which best describes the phenomenon. In addition, a reconciliation and reevaluation of pilgrimage tourism relations is required to break the dichotomy, a dichotomy that arose only as a product of modernity. In reality, both pilgrims and tourists are primarily motivated by cultural heritage, but each chooses a different side, spiritual or cultural. It seems that the two categories, pilgrimage and cultural tourism, are somewhat related and can connect it than the side that highlights the value of motivation as the main distinguishing criterion would argue. They often overlap, and we often see pilgrims taking advantage of their journey to visit something else as well. After all, a tourist is half pilgrim if a pilgrim is a half tourist. However, it is very difficult to draw a strict line between pilgrims and tourists. Persons who go on a pilgrimage are therefore expected to have an underlying religious motivation for their action. Nevertheless, we know that all pilgrimages were mixed motive events. A third acceptance is that which includes pilgrimage in religious tourism. It seems that pilgrimage is one more sector in the larger concept of religious tourism, which also includes missionary or leisure tourism. In fact, religious tourism represents all travel to sacred or religious significant places, regardless of tourists' motivations. Pilgrimage is the first form of religious tourism that historically preceded all other forms. The inclusion of pilgrimage in religious tourism flows could be considered as controversial as the inclusion of business trips in tourism. Different motivations, same result, but nevertheless, this choice seems legitimate. In any case, sharing the same destination does not create competition between these two forms of tourism, but probably collaboration, a productive symbiosis. Therefore, it would be useful to highlight the similarities and differences between religious tourism and pilgrimage in order to better unpack the context of this relationship. Religious tourism and pilgrimage share similarities from an economic, technical, and organizational point of view. From an economic point of view, religious tourism and pilgrimage are both phenomena organized by private companies, non-profit organizations, also secular, organizations belonging to various and diverse confessions, which cause the production, sales, and consumption of goods and services. They share the same infrastructure, media, and cultural heritage. From a technical and organizational point of view, organizations specializing in religious tourist services, as well as those that are dedicated to pilgrimages, are customer-oriented, addressing a type of clientele that traditionally relies on autonomous forms of organization, that generally do not require high-end hospitality and that seek experiences that satisfy the desire of visit holy places and or participate in religious events and offer packages of goods, services, to which should be added the experiential element, the spiritual content, and the adequate accompaniment of the visitors. Regardless the differences, the fact that there are two different terms, meaning religious tourism and pilgrimage, highlights that there are differences between these two realities, which are similar but not identical. Thus, a distinction can be made, and it can be made by considering the reasons, motives behind the trip. A tourist goes on a trip for his personal satisfaction, seeking only what entertains or relaxes him. A pilgrim understands the journey as a spiritual quest. The purpose is not just to see and enjoy, but to receive and absorb, to do something good, to find a destiny, or to get closer to God. The pilgrim remains alert, for any experience along the way may prove to be an encounter with God, a revelation in disguise. For the tourist, people and places are interesting diversions. For the pilgrim, the destination is filled with divine presence. It is full of mystery, wonder, and grace. For the pilgrim, the inner journey is as important as the outer journey, and they must always go together. Of course, the tourist is not the only one who travels for pleasure. The superficial view that the tourists travel solely for pleasure has been changed for several decades, and it is now recognized that there are many complex reasons why people choose to travel. Adler was the first to consider tourism and pilgrimage as two ends of a continuum. However, the distinguished work of Alan Smith helped to understand different types of travelers according to possible combinations of travel motivations, thus emphasizing the motivation factor. This continuity of the journey shows the progressive relationship between these two concepts, as you can see in figure. Zone A contains the pious, the pure pilgrims. Zone B refers to the relationship between pilgrim over tourist. Pilgrims with a primary motivation related to faith but driven by other secondary motivations. Zone C defines a relative equality, pilgrim equals tourist, thus a dual motivation. Category D applies to the relationship tourist over pilgrim, the opposite of Zone B, with a secondary motive of loyalty. And finally we have Zone E, the secular tourist, a motive of loyalty but only recreational or cultural. Smith noted that the pilgrim tourist path should ultimately be redefined as two parallel, interchangeable lanes, one of the secular knowledge-based path of Western science and the other the sacred, the path of faith. Then every visitor around the world could travel in its lane or in an alternation between them, according to personal need or motivation and according to time, place, and cultural conditions. Smith concluded that tourists and pilgrims seek the same recreation, income, and sanctions, and also share the same infrastructure. Based on Smith's claims, one can conclude that it is very difficult to distinguish between these two categories of travelers. As far as pilgrims are concerned, religion is the main factor in choosing a destination. But tourists can make a pilgrimage even though the original motive would be something other than religious. Similar to conventional tourism, the motivation may be pure recreation. Thus, the boundaries between tourism and pilgrimage are blurred. First, this is because the context has also changed. The pilgrimage, as conceived today, bears little resemblance to the pilgrimage of the Middle Ages. Second, the term pilgrimage is increasingly used in a broader and more secular context by visitors and academics to refer to visits to war or celebrity graves, celebrity residences, and burial grounds, which exhibit features traditionally associated with pilgrimages. Characteristic examples: Ground Zero in New York or even Graceland. Third, the term tourism is increasingly considered to describe a spiritual journey.